Hello everyone, I'm Rudra Narayan Das. Welcome you all to the World Human Sciences and Management Conference invitation to global dialogue on agnolo- agnotological context, disciplinary practices of social sciences and policy frames, organized by Center for Adivasi Research and Development Odisha in association with Indian Institute of Management Sambalpur and Central University of Odisha Koraput. Ladies and gentlemen, debate within, amongst, and beyond disciplines is the need of the hour. Interactions with the best minds of the world pushes for social change. Along with these lines, Dr. Bikram Kesari Jena was planning for such intellectual gatherings since 6 months after Initiative Policy Dialogue webinar series of Center for Adivasi Research and Development in collaboration with JN College, Mahapal, Cuttack. The whole agenda of CARD is to act as a savior of identity, of nature, culture, and language of marginalized sections of our society. In fact, CARD is framed to do meaningful and insightful policy for the resident of Koraput, one of the most ignorant side of the global south. The entire journey of this prestigious center represent the painful stories of Adivasi groups. My sincere thanks on behalf of CARD to Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur and Central University of Odisha, Koraput for their mesmerizing support to CARD for his 3D effect program like debate, discourse and dialogue and promote research-based higher education in Global South. My heartfelt thanks to Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, and Professor I. Ramabrahma, respective Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha, Koraput, and eminent author, educationist, Professor S.K. Pali. Ladies and gentlemen, the convener of this international forum is the eminent historian of Odisha, representing one of the pioneering institute called Ravenshaw University, Professor Dr. Chandi Prasad Nanda, and the son of the soil, futurist, philanthropist, and logician, Srijut Charudatta Panigrahiji, who guided us to nurturing the successful campaign of kind of ideas. Friends, people who staged behind the scenes and whose continuous effort has kept the team motivated are Professor Shubham Das, Dr. Samuel Lima, Dr. Kamal Prasad Mahanti, Dr. Payal Agarwal, Dr. Ghanashyam Giri, and Chinmay Kumar Sahu. For those of us joining too are welcome this academic dialogue. Friends, in today's lecture, we have with us Professor Johannes, founding director of Initiative for Sustainable Energy Policy, former professor of political science, Columbia University, United States. We'll be speak on a sustainable and just recovery from COVID-19. It's a privilege to have you, Professor Johannes. Okay, without wasting much time, I'd like to invite Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda for a welcome address on the honor of Professor Johannes. Over to you, Professor Nanda.
Hello, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
great. Good evening to all the viewers, and thanks for these inaugural comments. So there is little time to spend more on talking about the details associated with the objective of this program anymore. Now that it has been very clearly spelled out, the point that I would like to emphasize in the beginning, since we are really beginning a new journey in terms of a dialogue, which we have called as invitation to a global dialogue on different themes. And this particular theme that we are taking up for a couple of months from today onward, as has been said, is something to do with agnotological context of social science practices and policy frames. And a very warm welcome to Johannes for this, for agreeing to be with us. And nothing could have been more productive, more meaningful than to have Johannes with us to talk about a theme which is absolutely challenging at this point of time, and this particularly very in sync with the kind of ideas that we are trying to celebrate. And before that, let me also talk just 2 or 3 lines about the trajectory with which we have followed up this idea of having a kind of global dialogue. In fact, the architect of this idea has been no other than Dr. Bikram Jena, the director of CARD, and he has been pursuing this idea very strongly and very passionately right since 2018. And it came up out of a very small kind of conversation that we had in back in 2018, that how about organizing a kind of at that point of time webinar was not a kind of very familiar affair with all of us. It was at the time of pre-COVID in a way. So we are thinking of physical kind of platform where we would have finest minds of the globe who would be talking about some of the challenging emerging areas of thought that troubles the humanity. And we are also thinking in terms of trying to develop a language which we have been discussing, that it's a kind of hybrid language where natural scientists, social scientists, and people from the management sector do participate, and in an enriching conversation to develop a perspective, a very kind of commonality, a common perspective to take on issues which really troubles the humanity. So this was the point, and thanks to him and thanks to his passion and energy that he has pulled through these ideas. And today is the moment, one of the historic moments for all of us, those who have been celebrating this idea that has come through. And particularly thanks to Johannes for agreeing to inaugurate this show. We are not formally coming up with any formal ceremonial inauguration. We are trying to have this webinar series sip in and really get grounded before we begin, before we try to go for an appraisal of our the activities, and in between have an inaugural ceremony, something like that. And just to thank also the collaborating partners for the time being, as I am director and also Vice Chancellor, Central University, Koraput, and also there are possibilities that few other institutions might collaborate with this kind of exercise in the coming future. So coming back to again to the very few lines. I mean, Johannes hardly needs any introduction because of the fact that he has been a very eminent energy and environment expert, globally known for his he's the founding director for Initiative for Sustainable Energy Policy at John Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And he has authored very famous works, which gives you a clear insight of some of the major issues that troubles all of us at this particular point of time, and also as part of the follow-up to understand the issues associated with Anthropocene or climate changes. This book, for example, The Politics of the Global Energy Transition or Fossil Fuel Industry, Activism in Fossil Fuel Industry, have been really landmark works. And as a leading global expert on the emerging regime of energy and environment policy with focus on sustainable energy and political economy. Uh, uh, and political economy, he has been absolutely productive and provocative in the world of environmental thought. That has made a very seminal impact in terms of provoking activist intervention and policy dialogues. So that is how one needs to look at the work of Johannes. And you can see that, I mean, as you Google it out, that he has been associated with number of countries, whether it is India, China, Brazil, all these emerging economies, including Pakistan. And currently he has been working on some of these interesting projects for India, like clean cooking fuels and electric vehicles. And he has been advisor for many of these international organizations, civil society, governments, private sector on energy aspect related policies. I think the very talk that he has titled it as, just and COVID, I tend to look at this two uses like just and sustainable, which are very challenging categories, which is, I'm sure that he's going to reflect on this. It needs a lot of problem. It has attracted a lot of problematization. What could be a just recovery? And now that the people have started doubting whether we would really see a post-COVID context, or we are going to have a kind of COVID kind of scenario, and we are going to stay with COVID appropriate behavior, as WHO and ICMR have started talking about these in these lines, and these rhetorics have come to stay with us, has become part of commonsensical knowledge. So if he says that, just and sustainable, how it is to be. So I think this brings to my mind my understanding that it illuminates a whole range of questions, including climate justice, climate change, whether you talk of carbon dictatorship, carbon democracy, and the question of politics, climate justice and climate politics, whether it should involve only human or non-human, living and non-living, born and newborn, or not yet born. These are some of the questions apart from the question that the kind of usual lens with which we have looked at the question of environment and energy through what as a historian comes to me after reading this famous, very provocative book which have come up recently in 2021, this Climate of History and Planetary Age by the Chakraborty, that we need not see it within a particular globalist regime of historicity. We need to look at it in a kind of planetary regime of historicity, where we need to bring in different time scales, a kind of mix of time scales to look at these issues. So I'm sure Johannes is going to talk about the roadmap. How do we get out of this, kind of a shared sense of crisis, which has hunted us for last 2 years in terms of carrying on with a sentiment of COVID-19. Now these are only two comments that I'll make before I close. I'm drawn to this after looking at his title, and when I discussed with Bikram that you should have somebody who should begin this show by talking about climate. And he was, he was absolutely intelligent enough to have, and at least was also very fortunate to persuade Johannes to be with us. I think this nothing could be a better way than celebrating this journey with a talk like this, because I'm drawn to this question of human conditions today. Because if you remember Hannah Arendt in 1958 talking about human condition in certain ways, and he had imagined politics in different ways. But now the Hannah Arendtian politics, the way he imagined politics, needs to be revisited in the in a very major crisis and challenge that confronts us in terms of looking at this question of blow, birth, world, then planet, in what way and how. These are some of the questions that we need to simply, these are inescapable questions that we need to stay with it. We need to negotiate with this, we need to engage with these things, and people like Johannes are going to be real heroes, real saviors in terms of trying to track new areas of thought, new areas of insights, and give us some of these roadmaps by which we can save ourselves. Thank you very much, Johannes, for joining us, and look forward to a great evening with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nanda, for the wonderful welcome comment. Now, I would like to request Srijuk Charudat Panigrahi to go for his introductory comment. Over to you, Professor Panigrahi.
Hello. Thank you, Rudra. Thank you, Sri Nanda. Welcome, Johannes. As we are talking, we are also actively looking at coal mining in Odisha. This is the state where we all are here now today. So while we are acting or trying to act in a way where we would be tackling the three major planetary crises: climate, nature, and pollution, it gets difficult for all of us to get rid of fossil fuel. So as we continue with mining, as we continue with assuming that the rental economy will pull our people out of poverty, or will pull our people to a level where they could have more disposable income, we forget that this is the same nature or the loss of biodiversity or the loss of ecosystem integrity that has landed all of us in this trouble, which could have been avoidable. I mean, which was avoidable, could have been avoided. However, we are not going into that space now in the present context. What I'm trying to tell you as a little note before you start your address is that while in many parts of the world we think that by 2030 we would have sustainable development goals achieved, we still think that because of the climate challenges, because of the pollution challenges, because of the loss of nature, that effort would be undermined by about 80 to 90%. So can we achieve that? While we are thinking of a COP26 in November in Glasgow, we don't know what are we going to talk about. Is that a mere approach or a mere rhetoric that we need to do? Are we trying to make it a rigmarole, or are we actually trying to draw some action points for all of us to get involved? So when we talk in a forum like this, we have activists, we have students, we have professors, we have decision makers, we have policy makers, we have thinkers. So from doing to thinking or thinking to doing, whichever way you look at it, we are a mixed group which is essentially today worried about this. So when you say sustainability and the just recovery from COVID, that actually interests us to know more, because what is this just recovery from a pandemic? Now we know that zoonotic diseases is now going to conquer our lives for at least for some time. That personally, I believe, I have a strong sense that we would be invaded further by zoonotic diseases because of our own behavior, because of our own transgression into nature, because of our own chicanery. I would say that because we never knew how to be good beings on this earth, where we occupy maybe less than 1%, but we have killed about 83% species. Now in India is a mega diverse city country. And there are about 7 to 8% recorded species from India. But we don't know the rate at which we are urbanizing, the rate at which we are not getting connected to these factors and actively working towards reducing the crisis to whatever extent we can through citizen activism or through civil society activism or through policy making, whatever. So all this makes it a very complicated process, a very complicated system to work with. So today, as we would hear from you, we are bewildered, we are flummoxed, to say the least. We don't know what's going to happen. Not that you are going to give us a ready-made answer that, okay, step 1 is over, now there'll be step 2, now there'll be step 3. Now between step 1 and step 2, there'll be black fungus, yellow fungus, red fungus, blue fungus, green fungus, and there'll be no medicines and there'll be no ICUs, or the immunity goes down because there is too much of carbon dioxide in the air, because the tropical forests are all cut out, so we don't know what to do. However, at the same time, India promises that we would increase the forest coverage by a particular percentage. We would increase forest coverage to an extent where we say that 1/4 of our geographical area would more or less be covered by forest. But what kind of forest? Are we talking about primary forest? We don't know. On the other hand, we are talking about how many hectares of degraded land being restored. Yes, we have made a promise to ourselves that it was some 80 million hectares. So now, sorry, it was about 21 million hectares. Now it will be about 26 million hectares. So we know, we want to promise, we want to work, but where are we now? So your subject of sustainability and just recovery from COVID is probably the most relevant contextual idea, thinking, or the situation that we are probably today, we all of us are in. So we would be happy to hear from you, your thoughts, and if you could also throw in a few recipes for solutions or recipes for our conduct, because we think that each one of our conduct is also responsible now for the sustainability of this earth. So talking about sustainability is no more rhetoric. I think a few years ago it was distant, but now it is mainstream in political economic thinking and policy making. So from here, Johannes, I would urge you to address all of us and spend some quality time with us. And this is, as Dr. Nanda mentioned, this is the beginning of the dialogue. This is the beginning of the think tank actively thinking globally. So it's not about Odisha, it's not about India, it's about the earth, the planet. And the last question that I have in my mind, of course, that's troubling my mind, is do we deserve to be called the best of species? Is our time over now? Or let me rephrase, does the earth need us? Because we have done away with everything. We have killed animals, we have finished forests. Thank you so much, Johannes, and for agreeing to come today and to address us. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Excellent, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the kind invitation to share some remarks in this new series. I do want to note that I have a hard stop at 9 a.m. my time or 6:30 p.m. Your time, which means that I will keep my remarks quite short. I would also ask if the audience has any questions, please use the chat function because we don't have a lot of time. So it will be easier for me to directly answer the questions. You can ask them in the chat at any time if you have them. I'll set aside some time at the end to answer any questions you might have. But it's a bit faster that way than if everybody's going to unmute themselves and ask any questions. So Today, we are going to talk about the COVID-19 recovery. And we know that this, of course, has been a very serious economic blow to a number of countries. And I would, in fact, say that two countries that have been particularly hard hit among the major economies are the United States and India. So the United States suffered a very serious COVID-19 problem in late 2020 when the cases peaked. And India, of course, more recently had the second wave, which turned out to be a much more serious problem than the first wave, which had not hit India that hard. But now we are at a point where in the Western countries, vaccination rates are quite high. They are approaching 60% here in the United States. Basically, unless we see some new variants which are resistant to the kind of vaccines that we use, these Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, it is very unlikely that COVID-19 would have more than localized outbreaks here. In other countries, there's variation in the vaccination rate, but it's the effort is advancing, and I'm of course glad to see that India is now also making good progress with millions of people vaccinated every day. Because once you reach that 50 to 70% coverage with good vaccines, the case rates decrease dramatically at that point. But the question then becomes, what will happen to the economy, the global economy after COVID-19? So to understand this challenge, we need to first understand what kind of an economic problem COVID-19 was. And the key point that I would like to make here is that it was not a traditional economic recession. In a traditional economic recession, there is some kind of a problem in the economic system. It can be a credit problem, it can be employment problem, it can be any number of problems, inflation, deflation. There's many reasons why the economy could be off balance. But before we come to COVID-19, the global economy was doing quite well, actually, as was the United States economy. So the economy was in good shape, and we had a situation where people simply could not go to work. That was the big problem, was that people could not go to the office and continue doing their work because of the risk of infection. And the way many countries dealt with this problem was to provide temporary financing for people. So for example, here in the United States, we gave extra unemployment benefits for people. And as a result, the overall economic impact was softened. And when we are now coming out of COVID-19, the economy is recovering very quickly. This is very different from, for example, the 2008 financial crisis. On the environmental side, the COVID-19 crisis did have a significant impact on emissions immediately because, for example, traffic decreased. There was less commuting to work. Air traffic disappeared almost entirely, 80% decrease in the world. And as a result, there was a temporary decrease in emissions. But now the emissions have bounced back and they are on track to exceeding the 2019 levels by the end of this year. So we have not really gained any permanent progress in dealing with climate change and sustainability from this crisis. And this is a very important point because it shows that if we want to find a sustainable and a just solution to climate change and our environmental challenge, we need to find something that makes the entire society and economy more sustainable. It cannot be simply that we stop doing some things. It cannot be that we stop traveling, we stop going to office, because we've seen in the case of COVID-19 that those kinds of emissions reductions will bounce back as soon as we get back to travel, as soon as we get back to office. So as a result, we need to instead think of structural changes in the economy. How do we reduce the environmental impact of our economic activity? And to do this, the question to my mind is, what are the largest economies in the world going to do? United States, China, Germany, Japan, India, Russia, Canada, and so on. What are these large economies going to do to reduce their impact? Because in the end, we know that approximately 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from 20 countries. And so if those 20 countries take the actions required, then the remaining 180 countries can follow, and we will have a good handle on the problem. What I want to do now is I want to show you a graph that shows what these countries have done so far. And as you will see, it's not a whole lot. So let me see if I can find for you the graphic here. Let's see if the share is going to work. Are you able to see the graphic that I'm showing, figure 1? Okay, wonderful. So the reason why I'm looking sideways is that it's on my other screen. Please excuse me. So what I'm showing here is the stimulus spending. So these are kind of direct spending activities by the group of 20 countries, so the 20 largest economies in the world during the year of 2020. We are now updating this database for 2021, but this is only till December 31st, 2020. And I have 3 panels here based on the research that our team has done with funding from the Alliance for a Healthier World at Johns Hopkins University. The first one, panel A, is total spending. And this shows that 91% of the trillions of dollars spent by governments doesn't really have any impact on emissions. 3% would have a positive impact, so it will increase emissions. These are things like support for oil companies as they struggle, or airlines. And 6% will have a reducing impact. This is things like renewable energy, railways, electric vehicles. So overall, most of the spending in 2020 has really not had much impact on climate change. It's neutral. It doesn't really change the way we do business here. If we then look at panel B, we look at the emissions reducing spending. What kind of reductions are these? We see that 4% is research and development. This is kind of university activity, it's a laboratory activity. It will not have any direct impact now. It will have only an impact in the long run because we might have clean technologies available to us. 70% is what we call indirect emissions impact. So these are activities where, for example, if we take advantage of renewable energy, then over time, there will be reductions in emissions. And then only 26% is direct emissions reductions, where we reduce an emissions producing activity with this. So this could be things like, for example, replacing a highway with a railway. So again, we see that most of the activity here is indirect. It will only slowly over time reduce emissions. And if we now look at the countries, the different countries, we see here that first of all, the total spending is starkly in favor of just a small number of countries. The United States spent by far the most in 2020. China spent quite a bit, Japan, European Union, and then after that, it really kind of peters out. So the other countries, the spending was actually quite modest. The United States really stands out as the country that took very aggressive fiscal measures to deal with this problem. If we look at countries that have reduced emissions, the one country that, it's not a country, but a group that stands out is the European Union. They are the only one where almost half of their emission spending, their stimulus spending is actually emissions reducing, because they had a lot of these kind of green stimulus measures in their bill. If you look at some of the countries, their emissions increasing impacts are significant. For example, South Africa, Russia, and Indonesia. So these countries actually stimulated their economy by supporting the fossil fuels. If we look at India, we see India here as this is a 7th country from the left. We see that India's spending was mostly neutral. There was some emissions reduction, there was some emissions increase, but almost all of it, about 90%, was emissions neutral. And again, this is because much of the spending in India was kind of just direct relief for people. So should we now be worried? Because this doesn't look very good. If we have this climate crisis to deal with, we should be doing much more sustainable spending. My answer at this point is actually that there is no need to worry yet. And the reason for this, again, is that if you think of the COVID-19 crisis, it was a crisis that really focused on people not being able to work. So what the governments needed to do was life support, right? All they needed to do was give people enough money to survive the pandemic. And some of them did. I would actually say the United States probably had the best. We had a terrible response to the public health, but we had a very good economic response to this crisis. So to me, it's perfectly fine that during the public health crisis, at its worst stage, the focus was on just giving people money. That was really the only thing that was needed, because the economy was, other than that, just fine. People just needed to have some money to spend so that the companies would not need to lay off more people, right? The key question is then, what is going to happen in 2021? Because now is the time when we really have to start making those low carbon, sustainable investments. Given where we are today with an economic, global economic crisis from COVID-19, very low interest rates in almost all of the major economies, and a real threat of kind of slowdown in private investments, we are in a situation where public funding is going to play a critical role. So governments need to take the lead here. I don't think the private sector is going to make the investments required. This is not going to come from businesses unless they have very strong policy, regulatory, and fiscal support from the governments. So the governments need to lead the sustainable and just recovery. Now, let's talk about our hosts have already made the important remark that what do we mean by sustainable and just in the context of recovery? So let us start with sustainable. That is actually quite simple. We need to invest in clean energy, so renewable energy. We need to decarbonize our transportation, electric vehicles. We need to use hydrogen, green hydrogen. We need to find green industrial processes for steel, for cement, for aluminum. I know these are very important industries in your area of India, because that's where there's a lot of industrial bases built around the coal mines. So it's very important for this area of India to find out more sustainable ways to grow these industries. India is going to grow in steel production more than any other country in the world, because the demand for this wonderful material is really going to grow fast, given your large population and huge need for new building stock. So this is going to be the key thing, is that we need to make investments in electric vehicles, railways, renewable energy, sustainable industrial processes, new buildings that are more sustainable, energy efficiency. There's all these different things. We need to deal with deforestation. So there's a wide range of things where we need to act. And the good news is that I think we have good understanding of where to invest and how. So we know we have the technical and economic knowledge. Now it's a question of, are the politicians willing to make the investments and put the money into good work? I think the issue of just recovery is going to be more challenging, actually, because we've already seen that as we come out of this crisis, it has not happened in a globally coordinated, cooperative way. For example, when we saw the initial vaccine distribution effort, it happened much faster in the Western countries than in the non-Western countries. And we remember, for example, when the second wave hit India, the Western countries took many weeks, in some cases months, before they started providing any kind of assistance. They didn't share vaccines. They didn't share raw materials. In fact, they didn't even give India the permission to produce more vaccines because of intellectual property rights. So this is kind of an example of a lack of justice, right? We should all be helping each other. If we already have here in the United States huge piles of vaccines, I think we should be sending them to countries that don't have those vaccines. because in the end, that's what justice requires, that everybody will have the right to health, regardless of their wealth level or where they are born. I think now we are starting to slowly see better outcomes. The Biden administration has started to share vaccines with many countries, with a particular focus, of course, on neighbors, Mexico in particular. So we're starting to see some promising signs. The other issue with justice, which I would like to highlight, is maybe the biggest one in the long run, is that the COVID-19 crisis had the biggest negative impact on the poor people, right? Because if you think who has lost their job, who has lost their livelihood because of this crisis, it's not the people working in the e-commerce, right? If you are working for Netflix, if you're working for Amazon, if you're working for Facebook, you are doing better than ever because people are at home, they order delivery, they spend a lot of time watching Netflix, they spend a lot of time online. So your company is probably making more profit than ever. You've never been as successful as before. People like me at universities, we didn't actually see any decrease in student demand because many entry-level jobs were not available. Many people decided to come and take additional education. So we are also doing fine. Johns Hopkins, for example, has fully recovered from the crisis. Our medical school is back to doing elective surgery, and our endowment is at an all-time high because of the excellent performance of the stock market. But if you now look at, for example, let's take India as an example, because this is, of course, a country that's of particular interest to the audience here, and it's also a country that I know quite well. So in India, we saw, for example, a big problem with the migrant laborers, right? A very common way in the Indian villages for people to earn additional income is to send somebody to work in the towns and the cities. You all know this, right? They might work as a cook, they might work as a driver, as a maid, they might be a rickshaw driver. There's many different opportunities available. And even though those opportunities are not sort of fancy in the sense of working in Bollywood or Hyderabad, IT, they still pay much better than subsistence farming. So they are a very important source of income. But because of COVID-19, these people suffered a kind of double whammy. The first one was that they had to go back home. They could not continue working. Because if you have a COVID-19 situation, your wealthy middle class family will not want you to come to the house every day because they're worried about infection. But then on top of that, they may have gotten the infection, they may have gone back to their village, and they may have then infected other people. So it was quite a terrible kind of combination of these two things happening at the same time. And so the question then is, how do we create a just recovery for all these people who really, it's a terrible setback. I've seen some studies showing that in India, 100 million people went back to poverty because of COVID-19, 100 million people. This is a huge number because they lost their livelihoods, their opportunities. So I think we need to think very carefully how to help this segment of the society. And many of them, I know that this is an ADIVASI center that is hosting today's session. We know that this, of course, is a particularly big issue for the tribal and the scheduled caste groups, which have fewer opportunities available to them. So, of course, there's a particular importance in a country like India. Here in the United States, we see the same thing. African American, Hispanic, and Native American groups have suffered much more than, for example, white groups like mine or East Asian groups. Here in the United States, the Indian population is doing better than anybody else, but that's because we tend to attract the engineers and the IT technology masterminds from your very best university. So that group is not suffering. But this is what I mean by just recovery, is really like, how do we get these groups back to work? And I think there's a few key things. One is vaccination. So vaccination absolutely should be available to the poor. It should not be reserved to middle class. And in fact, I would even encourage policies where the poor people get a subsidy for taking vaccination, because they might be hesitant. They're worried, they don't trust the government. If you give them a little bit, maybe just 100 rupees, to take the vaccine, I think that would make a huge difference in getting people back to work. I think the second thing that is important for this population is to continue the fiscal relief as long as the opportunities are limited. So I would again suggest that I think the benefits of continuing direct transfers to the households that have lost their livelihood, as long as they need it, is well worth the money. It's not that expensive because, again, these groups don't make huge amounts of money, but the human benefit of that spending is significant. So as a result of that, I would suggest that that's the other one. And then the third one, of course, is to get the migration work back on track, because it is certainly true that the productivity in India and in all countries is more in the cities than in the villages. So it's very important to, on the one hand, make sure that migrant laborers can go back in a safe way with vaccination and all that. And at the same time, trying to create new livelihoods in the villages so people who cannot go will have better opportunities. For example, food processing, agriculture, handicraft, these are some opportunities available for the villages. So that's my kind of brief overview here. Now, I see in the chat there's, let's see if we have any, no, we only have here in the, some materials for feedback and some links to the center. But certainly would welcome any questions. And if our hosts, if you would like to respond or react to anything I said, we still have another 10 minutes, so feel free to jump in. Now I'm going to stop sharing. Let me know if you want to bring back the figure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Johannes. You know, let's see. I mean, if you're getting, I mean, people are still in an introspective mode. They're thinking through your ideas. They might bombard you with not many questions as the time goes on. So you're, you know, I'm sure that you're going to get many more mails. But thank you for these wonderful comments that you have started to you know, offer to this platform in the beginning. Just one
I think there is some connectivity issue. So Johannes, can I come in before we have Dr. Nanda back? There is a thought here, not a question, Johannes. You mentioned about the steel industry. Odisha, this state that we are now hosting this from, is tipped to be or planned to be, projected to be the next steel hub of India. This is also called the aluminium capital of India, or maybe Asia. Now, why I'm saying this is because this is also kind of aggravating the rental nature of the economy. And as long as we have the mining on, the economy runs, and there is a feeling that that gives the supernormal profits. But the distribution of the profits to the last mile is a challenge. And there, that creates the inequity. Now, as you rightly mentioned, COVID also brought out a few inequities to the fore. Probably they were always there latent, but the access to vaccine, the access to work, the access to subsistence were majorly hit. So when you mentioned about this direct transfer to the accounts, bank accounts, or the subsidy or the incentive for taking vaccines is something which is quite apt. I think which is quite apt and quite timely. And there has been narratives around, discourses around the country in various forums about this. But the issue here is the getting things done at this scale. the logistic issues or getting things done. So, and there are layers before we reach to the last mile, and that creates a lot of challenges, a lot of distractions. So, since you know India so well, what would be your few thoughts on what I just mentioned? One is the access issues, second is how do we meet the access issues, and third is this gestation period when we want to come out of COVID justly, how do we do that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just to join Mr. Panigrahi, because I got out of it. Can I just come back, in a minute, trying to complete my sort of puja that I wanted to have with Johannes. Sorry about this. Just to ask you, now in the emerging literature of climate crisis, there is a talk of bringing in this concept of habitability. That's one issue that needs to be taken care of. And secondly, the idea of scaling back, and also looking at the three layers. There is a need, very searching need. When you talk of sustainability, then there is a very crying need of looking at different scales. We cannot simply remain in terms of looking at how capitalism or globalization has produced this kind of phenomenon. And also at the same time, we need to look at this history of planet and history of life on the planet, and also history of the phenomenon, the way it has been produced in a capitalist the register of capitalism. So trying to bring in these three moments and the temporal register makes a lot of sense. And people are saying that you need to scale back in terms of the way you grow, and people have tried to equate it as a kind of spacecraft. Like the whole series of philosophers. Think of Heidegger, whether Gadamer or Hannah Arendt to Carl Smith. All these people talked about this idea that we are already, right since 1950s, that technology, the way it has really hooked us, and we are encumbered by technology, and where there is a technosphere, more, in addition to biosphere and lithosphere, and how do we make sense of it? So, I also learned the kind of projects that Mr. Panigrahi also brought in to this discourse. So, can you take all these, issues at one end? Also, there is a question which is already on the screen. So maybe you can combine all of them to, yeah. Okay, I think he needs to be unmuted. Rudra, can you? He can't speak. Rudra, can you unmute? Johannes.
Okay. Thank you very much. These are great, insightful questions. I'll try to answer very quickly everything. Before I do that, could I ask some of the colleagues and hosts, would it be possible for you to share your affiliation and email address in the chat? We are looking for partner organizations in the coal producing states in India. So I would very much welcome an opportunity to follow up with you with some ideas for possible collaboration, because Odisha is certainly one of them. So let me first very briefly comment on the issue of kind of steel and aluminum and all the distribution. So I think there's two things that need to be done here. One is diversification. So what you want to do is you want to build industries around first mining, then steel, then aluminum, and then you want to build companies around them that use those products so that you can keep as much of the value add at home. So the fact that you have steel and aluminum is already better than just mining, because if you just mine, almost all of the value add will be taken by somebody else. That's number one. In terms of the distribution, I think there's a few key points here. One of them is data. So you want to have good data, keep track at the very local level. Where are you able to deliver this, whether it's a financial transfer or other benefit? and then empowering the district officials and even the Gram Panchayat officials to actually do this. So you want to have this kind of like right level of decentralization and support there. So that's sort of one thing that I would highlight. And we've been working on some of these issues in Jharkhand, where we certainly face this challenge. We are now starting a program in Chhattisgarh as well, and obviously would welcome the opportunity to exchange notes with the state government of Odisha on ways to encourage this. In terms of thinking of these different spheres, so biosphere, technosphere, litsphere, all this, my view here is that technology is going to be essential, because human beings are not very good at kind of fully changing their behavior. We are always going to be looking for better life, and we are going to be looking for ways to build wealth. But the trick is to use clean technology and then use policies, regulations, and behavioral change to make sure that we focus on those. So one example, vegetarianism, which is a proud tradition in India, has made very little progress in other countries until we found the so-called plant-based alternatives to meat. And now that we have those, people's interest in vegetarianism is growing very fast. So it's a combination of technology, policy, and behavioral change. And that combination, I think, is powerful. I would like to just finally then briefly comment on the issue of electric vehicles. That is an industry that's actually dominated by China and not the Western countries. So the key question then is, will countries like India be able to build their own industry? And I don't know yet what the answer is. India is quite good with two-wheelers and three-wheelers, but it has not managed to do this in automobile sector yet. So the question then is, will the Indian producers be able to do this? It is a good replacement because if you think of when you add an electric vehicle, it's not about the fact that you have coal in the grid. It's that you need to add new capacity, and that's going to be going forward mostly renewables. So that's very good. I think overall, I'm pretty optimistic about the potential of electric vehicles. Now, I regret that we didn't have more time today, because we sort of clearly would have had a lot more to discuss. But again, I do hope that all of you will be able to follow up. Please, let's keep in touch. I have my website, which you can always find, and with my contact information and everything. And I've taken a note of the chat. I will follow up with some of the hosts here, because like I said, we would be very interested in working with local organizations, both the civil society groups and also the universities. We have a very strong partnership with Central University of Jharkhand. So why not have a partnership with Central University of Odisha as well? Thank you again, everybody. This was a real pleasure, and I appreciate your taking the time. Now I have to go and see my dentist to see how my teeth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Johannes. Before going to the vote of thanks, I would like to invite Professor Shubham Das to play the Sambalpuri folk song.
लिकरी झिकरी डाल पुरिया मनो काय पर फुलो किचरी मिचरी बापी बालिया मनो काय पर फुलो गुजरू गुजाराई रजा पानी प्राणी बोलो किचरी पिजा मन के बुझा रसी क्या निर्मलो सकाल उठ बुझट करी लड़ सरका मार बुझट करी खस बसन मार बुझट करी खद काली फुटा छुसुट करी गंगारांद पुनन रे कोट करी पड़ा बाड़ बुसना रे ओट पारी नहीं बस केन लट करी भविष्यानो के दु कोट पारी लिकरी झिकरी डाल पुरिया मनो काय पर फुलो किचरी मिचरी बापी बालिया मनो काय पर फुलो गुजरू गुजाराई रजा पानी पूरा निर्मलो किचरी पिजा मन के बुझा लिकरी डाल कुरिया मन काय पर फुलो किचरी मिचरी बापी बालिया मन काय पर फुलो गुजरू गुजा दाई रजा पानी प्राणी मोलो बिजरी पिंजा बनते बुझा रसिया निर्मलो
Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite Dr. Samuel Lima for giving a vote of thanks, formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Dr. Lima.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Rudra, for giving me this opportunity to give a formal vote of thanks. Thank you, Professor Urpelainen, for you enlightened us about the sustainable and just recovery from COVID-19 and just solution to the climate change. And also you talked about and show your presentation in the stimulus spending during the COVID-19 recession and its impact on emission and the spend of the US, China, Japan, and US. And also you talked about the renewable energy like electric vehicle, biomass, hydropower, and wind energy. Thank you so much. Professor Johannes Urpelainen joined us all the way from the United States. And thank you for being with us. Also, I thank you to all the participants who join in the World Human Sciences and Management Conference on AGNOTOLOGICAL context, disciplinary practices and social sciences and policy frames. In association with IIM Sambalpur, I thank to IIM Sambalpur Director and the Vice Chancellor of the Central University of Odisha, Koraput. And also I thank to Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, Director IIM Sambalpur, Professor I. Rama Brahma, Vice Chancellor, Central University Koraput. And also I thank Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda and Mr. Chayudatta Panigrahi for being with us. Also I special thanks to Sarat Kumar Palita, Professor of the Central University of Odisha, Koraput. And also I thank to Suvam Das, Kamal Prasad Mahanti, Ghanashyam Giri, Rudanaran Das, Chinmay Kumar Sahu, and all the participants, all the students of Ramsa University, Central University, and IIM Sambalpur, and all the researchers, scholars. And finally, the last but most important, a person who gathered together all in this digital platform is the most industrious person of our time. Is none other than Dr. Bikram Kesarjana, the director of the Center for Adivasi Research and Development. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you. Go to Rudra.
Thank you.